interesting title here, but is it really going to lead us in a good horror direction? We'll find out here. Starting with the IMDb plot. At a mall store, Apple leads a secret witch cult with co-workers Cherry and Fig. New hire Pumpkin questions their sisterhood, forcing them to confront inner darkness or meet violent ends. Okay, so yeah, Apple, Cherry, Fig, Pumpkin. Okay, we'll roll with that. Interesting names here. What happened to normal names? Anyway, all right. So this one is another recently released one. So I guess there is a little bit of twisting and turning here towards the back half. So I'll try to keep that kind of as spoiler free as possible for you guys. Um, but I guess and this is honestly another one that I wasn't really sure that I was going to turn on. I was like, okay, and I'm not, you know, so caught up that I need to see this. Um, but I guess one of the things that I kind of saw, I don't know if I saw it on social media. I'm not gonna say per se, I don't even know if it was in the trailer. I don't remember. I don't even remember if I saw all of the trailer or not. But somewhere I guess I caught when this was supposedly like supposed to be the craft of maybe this generation or kind of in that realm or being compared to the craft in somewhere or the other. And I think that was kind of the maybe the one mindset or one thing that I kind of heard was like, okay, well, if it is, maybe I should kind of check this out and see what this is all about. With that said, in the end, that's after watching this, that's a complete insult to the craft, and they should be insulted. Um, yeah, shame on anybody, for doing that because the craft had, some much better stuff going on here than with this one. Um, so anyway, yeah, oh, wow, and yeah, okay, an hour and 43. This was an hour and 43 minutes, and yeah, they did waste some time in it. But I'll get to that in a second. Anyway, so yeah, we do get introduced to um, early on a few girls here, and they're walking around the mall, and like everybody's afraid of them, and they're the queens of the mall, and as they pass certain things, they're acting like they're getting stuff free, and maybe a guy or two is checking them out, and everybody's like, oh, it's the fruits and blah blah blah, and then like, okay, whatever. And then they go into this store. It's kind of a clothing store, and they work there, and that's their thing. And they have this mystery boss that we never meet, and that's odd in itself. But they also have the one girl who's the leader. There's always the leader, and then these two other ones who are one's probably seems to be a little bit more there than the other one. And eventually here comes a new girl around, and she kind of catches the eye of the leader, and obviously she has to pass certain tests and so forth to be a part of this group here. And as she does, she then becomes an employee here of this store, because part of being this group, you also have to be an employee of the store. Again, insulting the craft here. This is like getting stupid. But anyway, we kind of go through this whole thing where as this girl kind of gets introduced to the group, we're also learning a little bit more about the group in itself. And through this new girl, she has her own moments with each girl, and that's how we learn a little bit about some of them, and what they're doing and so forth. And then as being part of this group, there are things that you're supposed to do and not do, and we find out that maybe the two other girls here are doing some things that maybe they're not supposed to be doing as part of this group. And obviously you have the leader who may or may not know that this is happening and so forth. But she's really intrigued with the new girl here, and getting her and is part of this group. So that kind of blinds her and so forth. So now the new girl has some secrets on this some of the other ones and so forth. Um, but there's just something off here about this whole situation and so forth. Um, and we find out that there was another girl before this new girl, and I guess one night they did like a spell or a conjuring or something of that effect, and let's say it didn't end well for this girl, and now as this group kind of forms together or whatever, they find eventually you're going to find a need to do this kind of spell again, and that kind of sets off alarm bells amongst the group, and do they want to do it, what happened last time, whatever, and so forth. So that's going to cause some friction in the group and so forth, and then we kind of head into a spiraling direction within this group of girls. Obviously, for several reasons, and I'm not going to get into any of that. We'll say that for you guys that have not seen the movie and want to see that, and why, what is going on here. There are a couple of things at play here within the group. So again, I think, one of the problems, as I mentioned, it is an hour and 43 minutes. And I think, towards the beginning of the film, they waste too much time with introductions and getting to know these girls. Obviously, there are certain things that are important with how things play out at the beginning. But, as you guys know, have watched me review movies, I do get a little annoyed when certain things and horror doesn't seem present enough in a movie that is supposed to be a horror movie. um you know i I just felt like early on it was too much about the girls and their nonsense, and getting to know them. Again, obviously there's some importance there, but I'm annoyed by it because no one's died, there's no horror, there's no spookiness, whatever, blah blah, and that kind of bothers me. So it kind of gets off on a bad foot with me, with not giving me enough of filling my craving for horror, which is why I'm even watching this. Um, I will say they do make up for some of that. Yeah, and later on in the film, there is a bloody moment or two that kind of makes up for some of that nothing happening early on. So they do make up for that. Um, you know, as you look at this group, and they're it's let's say witchy and maybe cult like. I mean, that's kind of what they're going for. But they never go full out. I mean, I think, again, I don't even want to compare this to The Craft. I really don't. Because but the craft, at least the girls were dark. At least you looked at them and you said, okay, well, this is a witch. These could be witches. They're definitely in that realm. Definitely, as the movie goes on, you see them go in a definitely witch direction and so forth. This just seems more like a weird group of girls for the most part. Even when they so-called do this conjuring or spell or whatever, it just almost seems like they're just doing kind of like an exercise, whatever. Obviously, they showed something that happened to make you kind of think that maybe they really did do some witchery here or whatever, and it kind of worked. And what they try to do later on, does it really work or whatever? Whatever. I mean, they're not really dressing the part of witches and so forth, and they're not really going the whole 9 yards. They're just kind of doing their thing, and if you want to call it more of a weird cult is probably a better way, and not even that. I think it's just a small group of girls doing their own weird thing. So obviously, there's a little bit more to it, and some other stuff happens in the back half of the film. And like I said, there is some, twists and turns with that. So, I mean, it does pique some interest later on. It does get into some horror later on. Um, but again, definitely not The Craft. Definitely, a slap in the face in that direction if you're even thinking that. If you want to call it a different version, a new age, whatever, I mean, I guess, go for it. But yeah, this just doesn't hold up in that park. Um, I think, the maybe if you want to take the movie, in a, not so serious way, I guess, it is okay, especially with, after, it kind of reaches a conclusion there with the girls or whatever, you kind of step back and there's another scene to the movie. Um, and you kind of see that and you see that it's even maybe even less more serious and already you didn't really take it as serious and then it's even less serious um, with what happens there, so that's a little weird. um, but then it almost wants to leave the movie off and start in the cycle again. And I'm like, no, we don't need a Forbidden Fruits 2. And we don't need, it's just like, we've seen enough of the fruits. Let's leave it be. We don't need to pick some other fruit names here and so forth. And start this all over again. But hopefully they do just let's just leave it at that. We went through this once. We're good to go here. Um, so yeah, with all that said, I think I'm gonna give this one two pools of blood. Really got off to a slow start with me. I think it managed to give me enough blood and guts and a little bit of craziness later on to kind of rescue it from me just completely being like for this movie. But again, so yeah, if you're looking for horror in this movie or some really good witchery and so forth, whatever, you're gonna have to wait for the horror part of it, and it's not gonna be great on the witchery and so forth. It is, I don't know, it may play better with a younger than me audience, I would say. Maybe they can enjoy that a little bit more. Doesn't look like it got a whole bunch of ratings here on IMDb with a 5.2. So, kind of subpar, I guess, or kind of not great. Could be worse, but not fabulous. So I think I'm in the right ballpark here. So yeah, that's gonna be two pools of blood out of five for the forbidden fruits, and maybe they should have just been forbidden to begin with. So with that, horrorsquarereviews.blogspot.com is where you can find all of my reviews, written in video. Certainly tons of video reviews for a while now, so you can like and subscribe and do everything else that everybody wants to do here on YouTube. If not, no worries, it is okay. I thank you for your time. Regardless, Blue Sky, Facebook information down below. Feel free to reach out to me there. And definitely in the comment section if you have seen this movie and want to compare it or not compare it to The Craft, feel free to. So with that, I will catch you on the next review, horror fans.